The White House says National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien has tested positive for COVID-19, but has mild symptoms and is self-isolating. This comes on the heels of some cautiously optimistic news about a potential breakthrough in curbing the spread of the deadly virus. Health officials say the U.S. has taken a big step forward in its efforts to develop a potential COVID-19 vaccine. 30,000 adult volunteers are participating in a U.S. government-run trial meant to test efficacy of a shot developed by the American-based company Moderna. And this news couldn't come at a better time. Over the weekend, Florida surpassed New York, trailing only behind California as the state with the highest number of confirmed COVID-19 cases. Meanwhile, it is a race against the clock in Washington, where the White House is working with Congress to pass a new coronavirus relief package. Senate Republicans are expected to unveil details of their proposal later today. Paula Reid is following the latest at the White House. And Paula, where do things stand on the negotiations of the next round of health relief legislation?
Well, Vlad, it appears that lawmakers are still a long way off from having a deal, but today Republicans are expected to release their long-awaited opening offer for Democrats. It's expected to be approximately a $1 trillion stimulus package. And some good news for a lot of Americans. It's expected to include another round of $1,200 stimulus checks for the people who qualify. But one of the sticking points in these negotiations has been that $600 per person per week jobless benefit that's set to expire. Now, the White House and many GOP lawmakers, they argue that that amount of money discourages people from going back to work. So White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows says the Republican proposal will extend that benefit, but at a reduced amount. Instead, they will cap your benefit at 70%, no more than 70% of whatever you were making before you lost your job. Now, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said that formula is way too complicated for the system. She notes that a lot of people don't necessarily receive one salary. They may get their income from several different sources, so trying to figure that out would be extremely complicated. As you know, House Democrats 2 months ago passed an agreement to extend that $600 benefit through January. But right now, the Republicans are also floating the idea of possibly, if they can't come to an overall agreement, just passing a narrow piece of legislation and then going back to the table to work on some of these other issues. But House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, she has completely rejected that idea, and all of this signals a pretty long road ahead.
So, Paula, one of the other sticking points had to do with additional money for testing. We hear these, crazy stories across the country of people waiting 10 days to find out their test results. Obviously, they're not quarantining just as a precaution. And so it's kind of the purpose of having widespread testing is being lost when people can't get their results in a sufficient amount of time. The debate was whether or not additional money is needed, because some of the money allocated for testing, as I understand it, has not already been spent. So what do we know? Where are they on additional money for testing?
You're right. There is still a substantial amount of money from the last stimulus bill that has not been spent yet. And there are a lot of questions about why that money hasn't been passed off to states and why some states that have it have not spent it, why it still takes so long for many people to get a test and then to get their test results. Now, when it comes to this stimulus bill, there were a lot of lawmakers on Capitol Hill who wanted to see funding for additional testing, other lawmakers who perhaps wanted to see a national testing strategy. Initially, the White House pushed back on that. But after some negotiations, there is an expectation that there will likely be some additional funding for testing. But testing is really one of the issues, along with schools and money for additional research. They really haven't hammered out the specifics. So we're waiting to see Mitch McConnell present their package today to see if we get any specific numbers on that today, if they have come to any agreement. And again, that's just an opening offer for Democrats. And then the two parties need to get together and negotiate among themselves.
Paula, so as you are aware, President Trump and Vice President Pence are making trips to battleground states today. This also comes on the news that I know you've been chasing, that the National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien, has tested positive for coronavirus. And the reason that I bring that up is because there have been a number of people now within the administration, within the White House, that have tested positive for the virus, including the girlfriend of the president's son, Donald Trump Jr., Kimberly Guilfoyle, and others. And so I'm just wondering what the White House is saying about the spread of COVID-19 within the administration. And now you've got the president and the vice president making trips to battleground states today, where we know the president is not keen on wearing masks when he does some of these visits.
Well, on masks, as you noted, the president historically has not really worn a mask when he's gone on a lot of these trips. But over the past 2 weeks, particularly amid these falling poll numbers, we have seen him more readily adopt a mask and encourage other people to wear masks. But he's been inconsistent. So it will be interesting to see if today, on his trip to North Carolina, where he will be visiting a biotech facility involved in vaccines, if he wears that mask. Now, Ambassador O'Brien, he is the highest-ranking official to test positive for COVID. So far, the White House hasn't said too much. They say there is no risk of exposure to the president or the vice president. But I talked with sources inside the NSC earlier today, and most of the people we got on the phone had no idea that this had happened. I spoke to enough people, a critical sample, to suggest that this was not known. This was not announced to the staff. They were unaware that the National Security Advisor had tested positive, and that many of the staffers only learned this from news reports. I mean, the risk of COVID here at the White House remains real. Last week, there's someone in the cafeteria at one of the buildings here who tested positive. There have been several officials who test positive. And I can tell you behind the scenes, even though it is recommended that people wear masks, most of the staffers here do not do that. Most of the officials who come to talk to reporters a few feet from here, they do not wear masks. I've even had the odd White House official get up in my face to yell at me without wearing a mask. So again, the risk of exposure, not just to the president, but to everyone here, remains real, and they are not doing everything they can to prevent the spread.
Wow, that is so disturbing to hear. I want to ask you about another topic, Paula. This plan/threat that the president has issued to send federal agents to hotspots across the country. Of course, we've been focused a lot on Portland, where they've been dealing with 50-plus days of protests, sometimes protests that become violent. But he's also threatened to send federal agents to Chicago, where they're not dealing with protests, but they have been dealing with an ongoing crime issue. Where are we with this? Is that plan going into effect? Is it the same plan for Portland versus a place like Chicago or New York? And you know, how does this fit into his broader strategy, if you will? There's about 6 questions there for you, Paula.
So the larger strategy for the White House is to draw a contrast between the president and Vice President Joe Biden. The polls are clear that many voters are voting against the president, who are supporting Joe Biden, as opposed to just voting because they love Joe Biden. Voters, according to our polling, they're unhappy with how the president has handled the COVID pandemic, how he has handled racial injustice issues. And this is an issue that the administration and the campaign have really seized on. They're trying to draw a contrast, suggesting that if Vice President Biden is elected president, that what you see in that several block radius in Portland is what you will see all across America. Now, they're also seizing on other democratically led cities in this country that have seen an uptick in violence or have consistently seen issues, for example, in Chicago with gun violence. And they do still intend to send out certain federal resources to Chicago, to Detroit, to other cities to help combat some of this violence. But again, there doesn't seem to be a lot of rhyme or reason to these cities beyond the fact that they are democratically led cities, and the president is trying politically to draw a contrast between himself and his opponent, even though obviously Joe Biden is not in charge of any of these cities, but arguing that he is the law and order candidate. I mean, this is really this is a culture war that the president and the campaign are trying to wage against Joe Biden by highlighting some of these cities and using federal resources. Now, there are also some questions about legally how they can send in these resources. Well, it is a little more clear in some cities where monuments or federal property is being attacked. When you're talking about specifically gun violence in Chicago, this is not the first time they have sent federal resources to Chicago. But again, it's unclear exactly what they're going to be doing. I saw some of the initial emails that were going out to Department of Homeland Security agents, and it even said in the emails, we're not exactly sure what our mission will be, but we're there to help.
Okay, Paula, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Vlad. Do you have one more thing?
No, that is remarkable reporting, Paula.
We are just falling over ourselves to thank you, Paula. Thanks a lot.
Bye, guys.